Okay.
Here's Steve.
There you are. Welcome, Steve. Okay.
Thank you.
I do believe that we're all here this evening, in which case I am going to gavel us in and call to order this special board meeting of the Truckee Donner Public Utility District at 5 o'clock on Wednesday, August 18th, 2021. Shauna, could I get a roll call vote, please?
Yes, thank you. Director Aguirre.
Here.
Director Bender.
Here.
Director Harris.
Here.
President Finn.
Here.
The record will note Vice President Laliotis is absent.
Thank you very much. We are going to defer the pledge this evening, which brings us to item number 4, changes to the agenda. Brian, do we have any changes to the agenda this evening?
We have no changes this evening.
Very good, thank you. Which brings us to 5, public comments. This is the portion of the meeting that we set aside for the public to address the board on any matter that is not on the agenda. So testimony related to agendized matters should be addressed at the time that that item is considered. Do we have any public comment this evening?
Madam President, it appears we have 2 raised hands, a Scott from Reynolds Way and a Dawn Bennett. And we'll open that up so that they can speak.
And I will mute myself.
Thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
We can.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say a couple of things that the board should hear. I'm not sure if you get access to the email I sent to PUD, but I wanted to say a big thank you during the plane crash for 3 different departments that worked well. And I know it's been a long summer, a hard summer, a questionable summer with the trees. We were happy that when the power went out, the crews worked very long and hard, and I mean long and hard. The line crews to reestablish power in a relatively short period of time. Number 2, I want to thank Ryan and his tree crew. They came out on a weekend and removed, I think, 20 trees and still some more on our side. And also, we're working with Josh and his crew to try to resolve some issues on the connecting over to our property. And again, during a time where you guys might have been under a lot of duress and a very difficult summer, I think you all need to acknowledge that your working crews are doing a great job. Even the administrative staff who connected us with the proper people to talk with. Anyway, I'm a person that's living right across from the jet crash site. So thank you very much, and keep up the good work. That's all I want to say.
Thank you very much, Scott. And I echo your appreciation for our crews and our customer service people and our administrators. They really do fantastic work day in and day out. Thank you. Do we have any other? I don't see any other raised hands.
We had a gentleman, Don Bennett, on with a raised hand, Madam President, and he might be having some connection issues because it's the second time he's dropped off. So do we want to hold just for a moment and see if he comes back on?
I think he's popped back up on my screen. So I will, oops, and now off. And now on. I will give him a minute and see if we can't get him on. Mr. Shaw, did you have a comment?
I do not.
Okay. Very good. In which case, I think that was everybody. Does anybody see anybody that I don't see?
Not right now.
Okay, very good. Which brings us to item number 6, director updates. Directors, raise your hand if you have an update. Director.
Yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know that I attended the dinner and the first morning of events for the UAMPS meeting that was over at Resort of Squaw Creek. And it was good to see all of our electric partners over there and reconnect with people that I haven't seen in quite some time. And the information that they shared was very good. So it was good to see staff there, and I appreciate the information that was shared. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Harris. Do we have any other director comments this evening? Okay, I'm just going to quickly pretty much echo Director Harris's comment that I attended the UAMPS all day yesterday. And just as always, a lot of really valuable, interesting information, shows me, you know, what I don't know can fill many, many volumes. And that's just, you know, the things that I know that I don't know. So it's really always awesome for me to attend these things. And I will say that for me, there were so many gems packed in that day, but one overriding sort of theme was that of collaboration and cooperation on pretty much every level, from regional, like truly the western half of the United States working together, to really, really local projects, and the importance of maintaining those relationships to be able to get anything done. So that was a big takeaway across the board from every presentation. So thank you all. That's my director update. Which brings us to the general manager update. Brian, what do you have for us this week?
I'll be brief since it is a special board meeting. A couple of items. One, I just wanted to say from the onset that it appears there are some technical difficulties on the TTCTV streaming for this evening. So we are recording the board presentations and discussions. They will be updated on our website first thing tomorrow morning. But there's, unfortunately, there's an issue on their side that we can't address. So, you know, we apologize for that. With that, I also want to just briefly update the community when they watch this tomorrow morning, that we have two major construction projects that have some traffic and safety impacts. I just want to thank the community for being patient and continue to be safe and drive through our construction zones with awareness for everyone out there. The first one out there at Truckee Sub, that is a tight little corridor there where our substation is pretty close to the road. So please continue to be careful and aware of our contractors and staff out there. And then on Northwoods Boulevard, we have a pretty significant water main replacement project. There is some water drainage associated with that. So I want to thank Mike Bond, the engineering team and the Public Works group at Town of Truckee, with working with our engineering and operations staff to coordinate those efforts. But you know, one of the reasons why we're replacing these mains is because they leak. And so the good news is that water loss will be mitigated once the project's done. The bad news is it's a little bit messy out there, and we're working our best to make sure that stays safe. Those are my updates, and we'll continue to keep the board updated on those projects.
Thank you, Brian. That brings us to the consent calendar. Do we have any public comments on the consent calendar this evening?
No, Madam President.
Thank you, Shauna. Do we have any directors that would like to pull anything or comments on the consent calendar this evening? I see nothing. In which case, would anybody like to make a motion?
The internet at her house is
Going,
poor.
Director Harris?
Yes.
I move to approve the consent calendar as presented to us.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second. The motion.
Anyway, if
Shauna, could we get a
anybody
roll call
does
vote,
anything
please?
other than just
Yes,
this,
thank you. Director Aguirre, Director Bender,
Yes.
Director Harris,
Yes.
Yes.
Vice President, or excuse me, President Finn,
Yes,
Vice President Loliotis is absent.
thank you very much. Which brings us to our only action item of the evening, item number 10, considering authorizing the board president to execute a memorandum of understanding with local agencies for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And for this item, I think we have a very brief staff report, and then it'll probably come back to me. And then we have Steve Frischer has been gracious enough to provide the board with some background information as well. I think, there we go. Brian, can I hand it off to you?
Well, we
Or
have
would you
the,
like me to take it.
yeah, I think you all have the staff report included with your board agenda packet. And I think at this point, unless there's specific questions for me, I would hand this over to you and Steve Frisch to start with the presentation.
Very good. So I'll just give just a very big overview. I believe I discussed this with you all a few meetings ago when we talked about forming this group, and you gave me authority to attend and form it. So this is the next step in the evolution, and what the underlying drive of this is to collaborate more closely with our regional agencies and districts to really be able to leverage and multiply our influence in getting our greenhouse gas reduction and environmental stewardship goals accomplished. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Frisch with the Sierra Business Council, who's been working very closely and just giving us a lot of the Sierra Business Council's expertise in this item. Thank you, Steve. You are muted.
You would think by now I wouldn't do that anymore. Thank you, Chair Finn, and thank you, directors, for this opportunity to discuss this item. In the staff report, I'm sure you have a copy of the Memorandum of Understanding. The core work anticipated here is a 6 to 12 month planning process, which would include a number of deliverables, including a strategic plan for this collaboration, which would include timelines and budgets, a work plan that would look at potential work that could be conducted over the next couple of years, a successor memorandum of understanding that would look at the governance structure for how this collaboration would work, and a communications plan for how we would communicate this work to the public. So the scope of work is relatively cut and dried. It's it's essentially a abbreviated planning process to get to the larger collaboration. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on the reasons why we're considering engaging in this process. As many of you know, and we can see from our air quality on a daily basis today, regional climate impacts are accelerating. The recent 2021 Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 6th climate assessment that just came out shows that temperature rise is coming in at the higher end of previous assessments. The California 4th climate assessment shows that temperatures in the Sierra are projected to increase by 6 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit. That climate assessment also shows that Sierra snowpack is projected to decrease by 60%. Soil moisture is continuing to decrease and will likely decrease by 15 to 40% below current levels by 2050. And the California Forest Carbon Plan indicates that incidence and severity of wildfire are expected to double by 2040. The state of California has established some pretty aggressive climate and GHG emission reduction goals. Our current commitment under AB 32, which was updated by SB 2 a couple years ago, is a 50% reduction below 1990 levels by 2030. To put that in perspective, we've reduced below we've reduced to 1990 levels by about 20% of that target so far. The state has also set an objective of net carbon neutrality statewide by 2045. And as many of you know, the current AB 32 scoping plan is being updated right now by the California Air Resources Board. And the state's strategy for meeting GHG emission reduction targets is currently considering targets of net carbon neutrality by 2035 instead of 2045. So we can expect to see new targets in every sector, including the utility sector. Pursuant to that kind of process, there's a clear role for regional collaboratives and local governments in this process. The state has defined these regional collaborations through a piece of legislation called SB 1072. And the Memorandum of Understanding that we're putting forward today anticipates forming a regional collaborative of some sort to meet the state definition of those collaboratives for engagement in planning processes. There's also a clear role for local governments, including special districts, to participate in regional and local climate planning processes that is identified in law, and also for local governments and agencies to lead in adaptation and mitigation efforts, as you guys already have been for years and making incredible progress on. And then finally, there's a role for local governments and special districts for project design and implementation. This MOU does not project any individual projects, but part of the process at the end of the MOU would be beginning to discuss the types of collaborative pilot projects that could be advanced in the community as part of that strategic planning effort. The rationale for moving forward really is to broaden the base of entities working to achieve these GHG emission reduction goals, to work in collaboration with other implementers, which not only increases the benefit of the effort, but also coordinates regional activities to improve efficiency, and probably most important, to position our region for future funding. The current California state budget has $3.7 billion in it for climate adaptation, a portion of which is projected to be used in the following ways: $100 million for regional adaptation planning, $350 million for local adaptation planning, $400 million for pilot projects, and specifically called out in the language is exploration for microgrids, low carbon generation, and wildfire risk reduction, and $350 million for community resilience centers. This is earmarked in the California state budget already and will be dedicated later on this month to a budget trailer bill. This is one of the last pieces of the budget that is yet to be completed. And then finally, this would improve positioning in the region for funding through current programs like the California Climate Initiatives, the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, CAL FIRE Forest Management Grant processes, and the California Economic Resilience Fund, which was also included in the budget this year. So really, this is all about creating opportunities for leverage in the future and getting efficiency by working together in collaboration. Thanks for your time and consideration, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Steve. So yeah, that wasn't quite a nutshell, but it's a pretty high level, everything is moving right now. Our local government, our communities, concerns, the state government, the federal government, and I really want us to be poised to scoop up whatever money might flow in our direction to accomplish these pretty big goals that we all have. So the memorandum that you have in the packet has been lawyered by Council Gross. He also shared it with counsel from the town and from the airport district. They did their lawyering and sent it back. Council Gross approved all of those changes. So, which is very normal process for any MOU. We've been through this before. So with those changes, I'm going to open it up to my fellow board members to see if you all have any questions or discussion for us. And feel free to raise your hand and I will acknowledge you. Or unmute. Director Harris.
Hi, thank you so much, Steve. It was definitely a lot of nuggets of information in there, but I'm so excited to see that Sierra Business Council is helping out all the different agencies to really bring all this information together and really drive it home, because I feel that climate change obviously will be very near and dear to our hearts, especially if we start losing snowpack over it. Those are shocking statistics. So I'm looking forward to seeing what this MOU can do and what all the agencies as a group, we put great minds together, great things can happen. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Harris. Do we have any other comments or questions from the board? Director
No
Ben?
questions, all good. So I'm
Okay.
totally in support of authorizing you to keep moving on it. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Director Aguirre, would you like to?
So
have
just
any
same as
questions?
glad that you did a good job on that. And I know you had some help, but MOUs. This is a good start for us. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
yeah.
In which case, I guess I'm looking for a motion.
Public comment.
Public comment.
Oh, that's right, public comment. Is there any public comment on this agenda item, Shauna?
No, President Finn.
Thank you. Okay, so now I guess I'm looking for a motion.
And
Yes.
President, Finn, if I may, if the board's so inclined, I would recommend that you consider a motion to approve this MOU in substantially the form presented, allowing for additional non-substantive changes as may be recommended or requested by the town or the airport district. As you indicated, this MOU has been vetted by the town attorney, counsel for the airport, and myself. But just like with the PUD, the MOU is still yet to go before those two other governing bodies.
Okay. Can we remember?
We want me to restate that?
No, so moved.
Okay, there we go. Director Bender just saved us. So moved.
Thank you, Jeff. Second the motion.
Thank you, Director Aguirre. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Director Aguirre,
Yes,
Director Bender,
Yes.
Director Harris,
Yes,
President Finn.
Yes.
The minutes will note that Vice President Liliotis is absent.
Thank you very much. Thank you, fellow board members, for helping us lead in this endeavor. Yeah, I think it reflects well on our district and what we're doing here at the PUD. Which brings us to the, oh, and you know, thank you, Steve. Thank you very much for coming and helping us place ourselves in this moment.
Thank you very much. We look forward to working together.
Thank you. All right, and now to the budget. We have a couple of workshops, 1, 2, 3 in a row that Mike Salmon is going to help us navigate. I'm turning it over to you, Mike.
All right, thank you, President Finn and members of the board. Well, first we're going to cover, do a first half of 2021 financial review. It's now August. We've closed the books through June. And so I'm going to brief everyone on where we're at so far in the current year. So the 2021 budget was actually approved back in November of 2019 as part of the biennial cycle. The district code requires a mid-year review, which we're doing tonight, and then we'll do a year-end review hopefully in March of 2022. Just for background, this is the 2021 budget for electric utility and water utility balanced budget presented, just to give you a perspective of size and scope. This is the same information presented more in a sources and uses balanced budget perspective. The cash flow for the electric utility is almost $32 million for the budget for 2021. And you can see that 87% of revenues of the sources of funds is derived from ratepayers and the rates. The AB 32 reserve withdrawal of 1.4 million, we'll get to that, and budget is 5% of the cash flow. And on the right-hand side, you can see that 31.7 million outflow, and almost 13 million or 41% of that is purchase power. Moving on to water, sources and uses, cash flow in and out is about 16.2 million. And the various outflows are on the right side. And of the 6 million, 37% of operations, 1.3 million of that is purchase power for our pumps. So a large portion of that 6 million on the right. So diving into the first half mid-year review, revenues are 15.4 million, 55% of the annual budget. So on a straight line basis, we're 5% ahead year to date through June. The forecast is to be a little less than that at 4% over annual budget, 1.1 favorable for the year. I did look at demand and revenue billings throughout the year and the ebb and flow. The cycles vary obviously by month and by quarter throughout the year. Demand is up. The KWH is up both to last year, 2020, and up to 2019. Our average customers are up 1.5% to 2020 and up 3.3% to 2019. So we're seeing growth on the electric side. I believe budget assumed a 1% growth rate. On the outflow side, purchase power is at 51% of annual budget through June. We have seen recent uptick in our purchase power costs, in particular compared to last year. And then we also were impacted by the Texas freeze event that happened in right in mid-February, and the ripple effect on our pool purchases through UAMPS that did affect us at the district. Expenses are right at 50% of the annual budget and are forecasted to be just slightly over, and that includes spending over $500,000 more in wildfire defensible space than was what is in budget. And should be able to absorb the majority of that and still come out just slightly ahead of budget on operating expenses. So for the year, forecasting net results on the operating income side of 4.2 million, which will be 700,000 favorable to budget. 1.1 in revenue and slightly over in purchase power and operating expenses. Beyond operating activities of the electric utility, there are also a lot of ins and outs of reserves and debt service and capital expenditures of the other cash flows for the electric utility, and those are presented here. In summary, investment income, as you know, is through the floor in a negative direction, and my conservative estimate right now is a $50,000 annual forecast for that, and yields right now on LAIF and our other pool investments are at 0.2%. As the board knows, 2 months ago, I was authorized to start investing in some other vehicles through another broker, and those yields are coming in right now around 0.55%. So that's helping. Debt service is on schedule for the electric utility, and then capital expenditures are forecasted to be under budget, and which also impacts the transfers between reserves. So on a net basis, kind of year to date is really not applicable as far as compared to budget, but for the year, again, 700,000 favorable in operating income, and then the net effect of timing of reserves and cash flows on capital will pick up another 700,000. So the general fund will be favorable 1.4 million for the electric utility. So good news on the electric front. Moving on to the water utility, revenues year to date are 50% of the annual budget, which is kind of on a straight line basis, straight positive. Forecasted for the year is to be slightly ahead of budget, and that's due in part to a rate increase that was greater than budget anticipated, as you all know. Billed gallons information is on the right, and everything is up to last year significantly. Perhaps due in part to the drought. I would point out that year to date, this is through June, and a significant portion of our water volume is in July, August, September timeframe. Customers have grown 1%, not 1.5 over an electric, and 1.9% to 2 years ago. Operating expenses year to date are 45% of annual budget, forecasted to come in under budget, favorable 300,000 for the year. And the forecast for operating income for the water for the year is 5.4 million, which is favorable $1 million or 23%. 762,000 of that is revenue and 268,000 in expense savings. We have some other moving parts and pieces to water as well. Investment income is struggling to budget. Debt service is significantly different than budget. Through June, you don't see that, but in the forecast, you see that difference. And that is the payoff of the SRF, Donner Lake Assessment District loan that the board approved a few months ago, and that has been transacted. Capital expenditures are over budget, and that's due to timing of projects, and in particular, the approval of the pipeline project in 2021. On a cash flow basis, essentially the water utility will end up right on budget for the year is the current forecast. This slide here is just a update on our current debt balances. And you can see on the far right, at the end of the year, we will basically have the current pension obligation bond liability balance of 539, which will be paid off through I believe June of 2022, and then we still have the certificate of participation bonds for water. And for those that will ask me multiple times, I will continue to answer that they are not quite yet eligible for refinancing. Those bonds, I believe we have a few more years before we can look at refinancing those bonds. They're about 4%. And then that year-end debt, these two notes in yellow are important to point out as we shift gears to the next agenda topics. And so I called them out here. The 11.2 million in debt at year-end is about 8.5% of our capital assets. So we do not have the district does not, as you're aware, I'm just pointing out, the district does not have a lot of debt. The district is not currently highly leveraged. Quick briefing on accounts receivable. So we bill for water and electric services, and not all customers are paying, particularly due to this pandemic that just continues to nag us all. So our 90-day plus through June is at $213,000. 152,000 of that is electric, 661,000 is water. Did come slightly down in July. There is a electric and natural gas, I believe, related CAP program that I believe through the feds, the state is rolling out, and we're answering surveys, filling out forms, filling out detailed customer information as far as balances go to look for potentially some relief to utilities on the electric side. And there's a similar program being worked on the water side. There's no fiscal impact on this item. And I'm asking the board to receive this report and provide any comments. I'm happy to answer any specific questions on any of this material.
Great.
Turn it over to President Finn.
Thank you, Mike. Do any of our board members have any questions on any of the material presented to us, our mid-year update? Okay, I see lots of nope.
Looking good. Thank you.
Looking good. That's
There's a lot
right.
of material there to adhere, and Michael, you've done a pretty good job on that report. Thanks again.
Yes, in recap, thank you. I just, things are pacing well in 2021, and demand is up and some of our costs are up. But overall, things look good financially for closing out the year in a good fashion.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm glad to, it's always good to see we're paying our bills and we're covering our nut. It's always the goal.
We are doing that.
Okay. So I thank you. I don't see any other comments, which means I think we can move on to item number, forgot what item we're on. 12? 13? Sorry.
11.
Where am I? Okay, item number 12, our next presentation, our long-term debt pension update and pension obligation bonds, the really riveting part of the night. Let's go.
Okay, so first I'd like to introduce a few guests that we have on the Zoom call today in the board meeting. First, I'd like to introduce Anna Sarabian with Fieldman Rolap and Associates. She's our municipal bond advisor. Thank you for joining us, Anna.
Thank you.
And then we have Dan Shaw and Rick Brandis of the underwriting firm of Brandis Talman, which is a division of Oppenheimer and Company.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. I'm going to share screen. We're going to cover two topics with the team today. We're going to cover two topics. One is revenue bonds, capital bonds for capital expenditures, and then we're going to talk about pension obligation bonds and our pension liability. I am going to drive a presentation once I get there.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, I don't think that's it. Oop.
You got it, Mike.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Again, Madam President, members of the board and staff. My name is Anna Sarabian. I'm with Fieldman, Rolap and Associates. As Mike said, we're a municipal financial advisory firm. Just a quick introduction and give you a little bit of background of our firm. I promise I'll keep it very short. We were established back in 1966. So we just celebrated 55 years of providing services to municipal public agencies. We are an independent financial advisor. We only represent public agencies such as yourselves. We do not represent private entities, developers, or are not affiliated with investment banks or other underwriting firms. Why this is important to you is because it ensures we're truly independent in the financial advice we provide to our clients. And as a registered municipal advisor, we have fiduciary responsibility to our clients, meaning that your interest comes before any financial or other interest we have. I'm a principal at Fieldman and have joined the firm 18 years ago. And I'm pleased to be here tonight. I have a PhD in economics, so if I dive a little bit too much into the details, please pull me back. I'll try to keep it high level for tonight's presentation. And with that introduction, Maybe let me give a chance to Rick and Dan to introduce themselves, and then I'll dive into slide 1.
Sure. Thank you, Anna. And Madam President and members of the board, thank you for having us. Our firm, Oppenheimer and Company, goes back about 100 years. It's a national brokerage firm. We are a national bond underwriting firm. Our group, Brandis Tallman, was acquired by Oppenheimer in 2020. But Brandis Tallman was an independent underwriting firm, and we worked with the district back starting in 2012. We refunded the old Greenwood bonds. We refunded the Calpers side fund obligation. We actually underwrote the 2015 water revenue bonds. So we're very familiar with you, and we appreciate the relationship. And as an underwriter, our job is to work with the municipal advisor to structure and sell the debt to the market. And we price the bonds, and that's our job. Dan, would you like to add anything?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Shaw. I'm also with Oppenheimer, and I do a lot of the behind the scenes work. I'm running the numbers. I'm the analyst here, but sometimes I do get to come on stage like now. But yeah. All right, Rick, Anna, I'll let you go for it.
Go ahead, Anna.
Thank you. So we can skip through this slide. This is just the required disclosure that Rick and his firm need to provide, essentially saying that they're not your municipal advisor, they are an underwriter, but they have a duty of fair dealing with the district. And so it's just a legal requirement that that be included in every presentation. So on this slide, just to set the stage, we wanted to give you a historical snapshot of the past 30 years worth of the municipal market data index. And what that is that that's a proxy for tax exempt interest rates, municipal bond interest rates. And why is that important to you? Well, because as a public agency looking to fund capital projects, you are eligible, since these projects benefit the public, you're eligible to borrow at tax exempt rates to finance those projects, should you wish to do so. And here in 2 colors, we have shown you the benchmark 10-year municipal market data index, which is a proxy for what the 10-year rate would be, and the 30-year in blue. And you can see that going back 30 years through today, if you just look at the graph, we're near all-time historic lows right now. In terms of just putting it in perspective, you can see that the highest point for the 10-year was right around the mid-1990s, where we were a little over 6%. And the lowest point was achieved last August. Actually, the data shows here August 11th, but I tend to claim it happened on my birthday, August 7th last year, and it's held for a few days. But the lowest point for the 10-year was at 0.58%. And we're currently at 0.88%. And yes, it is slightly higher than the 0.58, but if you compare it to the 6%, we are near historic lows. Similarly, for the 30-year rate, we reached a peak right around the same time in the mid-1990s at 7% or so. And the lowest point last summer was at a little under 1.3%. So we're right now at 1.48%. And again, from a historical perspective, very close to all-time lows. So in summary, from an interest rate environment, the market's pretty attractive right now. And there is a lot of interest and demand from investors in purchasing tax-exempt municipal bond paper. I know you're not looking to be in the market right now, so we're just providing this information as background. Moving on to the next slide, and please feel free to interject with any questions as we go along. So in terms of capital improvement projects, the district itself and many other public agencies typically use different strategies for funding those projects. They rely on loans. They go on a pay-go basis to fund all or some of their projects, or they look into utilizing hybrid structures where they would, let's say, pay for the smaller projects on a pay-go, and then larger projects they would entertain maybe financing. And so we know that the district is considering potential projects for the water and electric system in the approximate amounts as laid out here, 5 and 6 million. And so given the very attractive tax-exempt municipal bond market, we thought that the district could consider looking at analyzing the potential to borrow for those projects and preserve its cash on hand. In a few slides, we will share with you the numerical analysis that was prepared to show how, based on current market rates, those projects could be financed. And again, we recognize that you're not looking to do this right away. So this is for informational purposes. And we know that you could potentially be considering how to go about these projects either next year or the following year in 2023. And with that, unless you have any questions on the market, I would hand it over to Dan.
Hi, yes. As Anna said, we want to give you a glimpse of what a financing would look like today, even though I know the financing won't actually happen for a year or two. So I performed 2 numerical analyses. The first one with a 30-year repayment term. I have 3 columns here, a column for the water capital improvements, the electric capital improvements, and then a combined on the far right for a project fund of $11 million, 6 million of which is for the electric system, 5 million for the water system. I've built in a few other assumptions in my model, like cost of issuance, original issue premium, which is something that investors pay to essentially get a higher rate, which buys down the debt. Overall, we're getting a par amount, which is a amount borrowed by the district of just over $9.5 million. And for this 30-year term, I really want to show you these bottom 2 rows underneath where it says numerical results. Average fiscal year debt service is just under $550,000 we're estimating. So each fiscal year, that's how much a district would be paying. 302,000 of which would be charged to the electric system, and then 250,000 would be charged to the water system each fiscal year. On a total basis, that puts total debt service over the 30 years over just over $16.5 million, 9 million of which would be charged to the electric system, and then 7.5 million to the water system. So that's just a preliminary 30-year analysis of what it looks like today. And like Anna said, as rates move, we really don't have a guide.
And Dan,
yeah.
Interject and make the point across that even though these bonds are with a 30-year term, the district will have the flexibility to refund or prepay them typically after 10 years. So you will have that flexibility, and we just wanted you to be aware of that.
Yep. And one more thing I want to point out is the 30-year term because that's really the longest term most issuers go out to, it does provide the lowest average fiscal year debt service. So that $554,000 per year per fiscal year if the district really values, a low average fiscal year payment, they would really want a 30-year term and be favorable. Yeah. Next, we'll move into the 20-year term here. So I've made all the same assumptions, borrowing $11 million, this time paying over 20 years. And if we go to those bottom two rows, you can see how the average fiscal year debt service does go up. By shortening the term, it does bring average fiscal year debt service to just under $700,000. That's split between $380,000 of it being charged to the electric system, and $317,000 going to the water system. But by shortening to a 20-year debt service, you do reduce overall debt service. Total debt service is now lower. It's under 14 million overall over the 20-year term. It's 13.9 million, with 7.6 of that million being charged to the electric system and 6.3 million being charged to the water system. Those are two ideas. And like Anna said, this model likely would also have a 10-year call where the district would be able to repay it after 10 years. But just gives different ideas of how different terms could affect how much the district is paying each fiscal year and over the total term of the loan.
Before I begin, any questions about the numbers?
Yeah, I do have a quick question. So are those the rates that you mentioned in here, are those variable rates or are they fixed?
Fixed.
Is this sold as a fixed term? Yeah, a fixed rate. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We wouldn't advise on the district to borrow at variable rates. Just it's too risky. And given the low interest rates, it's good to lock in those low fixed rates.
Definitely.
Hey, Mike, can you go back one slide?
Sure.
Thank you. So if you look at the true interest cost on the 20-year model, look how low that interest rate is. It's closer to 2% than 3%. And so that's why a fixed rate would be the better way to go as well.
It hurts you on the investment side, as we heard from Mike earlier.
Right.
It's really painful. You're not really getting a lot of return for your investments, but on the borrowing side, it's really favorable.
Yeah, it's a good deal for you. Just to give you an idea of how long would it take to do a capital project financing, typically it's about 12 weeks. It would be a bond issue, a public sale. The bond attorneys would draft the legal documents and the marketing document, which we call the official statement. Before the bonds are priced, we call that the preliminary official statement, the POS. And that describes the district, your projects. It shows the financial wherewithal of the district, the credit rating, and it talks about the risk involved for the investor. So it's about 4 weeks to bring that to the board, 4 to 5 weeks to have it approved. And then once we finalize the documents and have approval, then we distribute a credit package to the rating agency. Your water enterprise has a very good rating. It's AA-. Anything in the AA category or higher is fantastic. The electric enterprise is not rated. You don't have a public debt on the electric enterprise. So for our models, we just assume AA-. But the credit rating would be important for the market. And after about 2 months, we would get the rate. By the 2-month mark, we would get the rating and then distribute the marketing document, the preliminary official statement, to investors. We'd price the bonds around week 10 and close the transaction in week 12. Mike, you want to go to the next one? So the municipal advisor and your underwriter are only part of your financing team. In addition to your advisor and your underwriter, Another important component is your bond counsel and disclosure counsel. The district has worked with a very well-known bond counsel firm called Stradling. Stradling would act in both capacities. One attorney would provide the legal advice and the tax opinion to show that the bonds are tax exempt. Another attorney at Stradling would provide the disclosure information. They would prepare that official statement that would go to investors. In addition to the bond attorneys, the rating agency would be involved to provide a rating. We added on here bond insurance, but in your AA category rating, we would not think you would need bond insurance. Bond insurance are for those agencies that have a lower rating. And that would increase their rating to the AA category. And then the trustee would provide the administration on the bonds. They would pay the bondholders and the funds that, and the district would make its payments to the trustee to pay the bondholders. They would administrate the bond issue over the life of the bonds. And everybody, you could see how everybody is working for you, the issuer. You're the hub.
All right.
Any questions?
All right. If there's no further questions on this, we'll switch gears to pension.
I'm sorry, I actually do have just a quick question. So what kind of things do affect the basically our credit ratings?
You want me to answer that, or Anna?
I can start, Rick, and you can jump in. So your ratings, since this will be enterprise utility credit, will really be based on the operating results from the water and the sewer enterprises, and rating agencies look at 5-year historical performance, essentially net operating income, and what that looks like. They also factor in any transfers in and transfers out, and what's the debt service coverage. So net income divided by debt service, what is that coverage? And the legal documents have a minimum requirement that you need to meet, but the ratings really typically based on coverage that exceeds the minimum. They also look at your reserves and cash on hand, and any policies you have in place to ensure that you are reliable and you will not be spending down your reserves overnight. In a nutshell, that's a very quick summary. Rick?
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Covered it well, Anna. Yeah.
I'm going to pull up the next presentation.
Mike, while you're doing that, can I ask a couple questions?
Yeah.
I imagine so.
Thanks, President Finn. So just, we're talking about a public offering. Has there been any consideration to a private placement or other types of bond financing vehicles, such as the California iBank or other opportunities like that, and how those might compare with this type of offering?
That's a great question. And from our perspective, we were just presenting today a background on the municipal market and one option If we hear that the district is interested in borrowing for these projects, then we will dive into a more detailed analysis, comparing and evaluating all the options. In terms of a private placement, I just want to give you the differentiation with the public offering, a very high level again. So the private placement, you negotiate and get a rate with one bank. At the end of the day, it's competitively done and you select the lowest bid. However, banks don't go out 30 years. They look at the shorter term. Sweet spot is 15 years. Sometimes you can find bidders that go out longer. So keep that in perspective of the annual debt service payment you'll be making. The shorter the term, the higher that payment, but the more you save in interest over the life of the borrowing. And the other point for the private placement is that you only get one rate. So year one for your debt, you pay the same rate that you would pay in year 20. And when you do a public offering, there is a fixed interest rate curve that results in lower rates in the early years because the term is shorter, and higher rates in later years. And they average that rate that Rick pointed out, the true interest cost. But you get the benefit of an upward sloping curve with lower rates in the earlier years, and it all averages out. Whereas with the private placement, you just get one rate.
Yeah. Typically, if the district decides to go 20 years, we would run the comparison between the 20-year private placement and the 20-year public offering, just to be sure. Which market is better, the public market or the direct placement market? If you go 30 years, the public offering would be probably your best bet.
But in terms of issuance costs, you do save in terms of the issuance costs on a private placement. So absolutely, those two will be compared.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, so jumping into the world of unfunded pension liability. Again, we'll start with a historical perspective. The district, like all public agencies, not only in California, but throughout the United States, has been facing increasing pension costs. And so how did we end up here is a question to start with. And if we look at historical performance, Calpers, who administers the district's pension plan, and a lot of other agencies' plans in our state, enjoyed really high returns historically, over 10%. And so those pension funds that were administered by Calpers for many years enjoyed what's called super funded status. They were even at some points funded more than 100% of what they needed. And in those great years, employers were thinking, well, you know, everything's going great. We're flush with cash. Let's reward our employees. Let's go back and increase benefits retroactively. Let's add on to the benefits. Let's be very generous. We have the money. And so then the early 2000s came about, and the market crashed. And so all of a sudden, those super funded statuses got erased. And now we were looking at negative returns, -6, -7%. And look at Calpers as a monster investment manager, if you wish. They collect the money from all the agencies, and they have certain assumptions what those investments will yield on a given year. And if they achieve their investment return, then their projections going forward are unchanged. However, the market fluctuates, and to the extent the investment returns are higher, then your liability next year will be lower. But if they missed their projections, then your liability will be higher. And so every year things get readjusted. In addition to the early 2000s, then we got the Great Recession, and that exacerbated the pain, so to speak. And as a result of that, as of a couple years ago, Calpers was far away from being super funded. They were slightly above 70% funded. And a lot of public agencies who are in the 80 to 90% funded status, all of a sudden now are in the low 70s to 60%. And so that's a concern from one side in terms of their funded percentage, but on the other hand, the concern comes with the fact that now everyone needs to play catch up, and your annual payments as a result are increasing. So in addition to playing catch up and making up for investment returns which didn't materialize, and you can see here on the right how we've gradually moved down on the scale, starting from 8.25 investment return, coming down to 6.8% in 2021. So obviously that results in higher unfunded liability. But on the other hand, assumptions are changing too, actuarial assumptions. People are living longer. So mortality rates are dropping. And even though some people are working longer, there is the baby boom effect too, and a lot of people are retiring at the same time. And if you go back to the super funded status and all the great benefits that were promised, now it's time to figure out how to pay for them. So that's it from a historical perspective. As it boils down to the district's specific circumstances, you have two plans. One is the PEPRA plan, which got enacted a few years ago by all agencies in California. And so that one, being a new plan, has very small unfunded liability. The other plan, the other miscellaneous plan, is what we call the classic one. And so that's the one we'll be focusing on in today's presentation. And if we go to the next slide, we can see there on the left graph how the unfunded accrued liability for the district has been growing. And you can see over the last 4 years, especially over the last 2 years, it's grown by almost 1.5 million. So in 2020, it was at 14 million, and as of 21, it was estimated at 15.4 million. And so rapidly growing. The mirror image of that in terms of funded ratio, you can see on the graph on the right, and you can see how that funded ratio has been going down. And so what that means is that the districts now under pressure to keep up with its liability and do something about it. Because if you don't do anything, this liability will keep increasing, while at the same time, your payments keep increasing. And I'll show you that on the next slide. In terms of the funded ratio, I just wanted to explain what that is. So every year you make payments to Calpers for your annual required contribution. And so Calpers, as we talked about, invests those monies every year. And so you have a portfolio of assets with Calpers. And so the market value of assets gets evaluated periodically. And so when you compare that market value of assets to the accrued liability you have for making the pension payments, that ratio is what we call the funded ratio. And as the denominator grows, the ratio decreases. So based on the latest Calpers actuarial report, which is attached to the board packet, you're at 73% funded ratio. Going to the next slide. So this is a graph of the district's UIL for the miscellaneous plan and your required contribution on an annual basis. And you can see that it's really increasing over the next 10 years, reaching a peak in 2032. And that peak in 2032 is a little under 1.8 million. But you can see that over those next few years, you will be increasing from 1.2 million in 23 to 1.6 million in 28, for example. So every year, gradually paying more. And after you go over the hump, then your payments will be decreasing, but the district's UIL gets amortized over 24 years, so through 2045. And again, this is based on the most current Calpers assumptions. And I want to make it clear that as assumptions keep changing and as investment returns keep fluctuating, these numbers could go up or down. Maybe I'll pause here and see if you have any questions before we dive into the next slide. Okay.
I would just say that this chart does not present the last few years of actual UAL payments. For example, in July of this year, the payment was 1.1 million. And to the left of this bar chart would be the first bar would be 1.1 for 2021, and then leaves about 950,000 in 2020.
Right. And also this graph only represents your unfunded accrued liability payments, UIL, but the payment you make every period to Calpers has two components. One is the normal cost, and one is the unfunded accrued liability. And you cannot prepay the normal cost. You just, every period you have to make that payment. So there isn't much you can do about that one. But you could prepay or sculpt around a strategy you choose, your UIL component. So moving on to the next slide, what are some strategies to mitigate rising pension costs? So one strategy which actually a lot of agencies rely on every year is Calpers offers an incentive of prepaying your annual Calpers UIL payment in one shot. And as long as you do it prior to July 31st each year, you get a discount for doing so. And so in looking at the district's Calpers report, for example, for fiscal year 22-23, based on your most current actuarial report, if you were to make monthly payments like you would typically do, over the year, you would pay or you would owe Calpers 1.34 million, call it 1.2 million. And if you did the prepayment prior to July 31st, you would owe them 1.19 million. So that's about 3.3% of savings off the bat. So that's one strategy. Another strategy that Calpers allows is, if you remember on the prior slide, your current UAL amortizes over the next 24 years. So it has another 24 years to go, right, through 2045. Well, Calpers allows you to restructure that and shorten the amortization. And so they call that fresh start. And so what this fresh start means is they essentially tell you, okay, you can reset, and instead of 24 years, you can choose to pay us off in 15 years or 20 years. So think of it as a mortgage, right? You have a 24-year mortgage remaining, and you decide that you want to pay it off sooner. So you replace it with a 15-year mortgage, okay? And the benefits of doing it are that, just like with a shorter term mortgage, you will save on interest because you will be paying this off in 15 years as opposed to 24 years. However, once you decide to do a fresh start, you're locked into that new payment structure. And remembering the bond example from the prior presentation, the shorter term results in higher annual payments, right? And so if you replace 24-year term with a 15-year term, you will now be paying much higher payments. And so just to give it, to put that in perspective, again, based on the Calpers report, over 15 years, if you were to replace your UAL with a 15-year fresh start, you would owe $1,650,000 every year for the next 15 years. And remember, you don't get to the $1,650,000 until 2029 right now, based on your current amortization. But now you will start a lot higher. And so from that perspective, if you're already struggling with what to do about rising costs, maybe starting with much higher costs to begin with is not the best strategy. And it gets worse if you did a 10-year fresh start. That payment would be roughly $2.1 million per year. Granted, it's only over 2 years, but how do you come up with so much cash in the short run? So remember that the fresh start, yes, it works if you're flush with cash, and you know you will be flush with cash for a consistent period of time. But there is no flexibility when you choose it. Once you choose this, you're stuck with it. Then what are some other not so inflexible strategies? Well, you could set up a Section 115 trust fund where you deposit money as you collect it or as it becomes available. And those monies are dedicated only for the payment of pension costs. Creating a formal trust gives you also credit with the rating agencies, because now it's counted as an asset instead of you having a pay-go strategy with Calpers. So it's beneficial to have one. On the other hand, once you put the money in, they can only be used for pension-related costs. You cannot take them out and say, we want to fund a project with them. Another strategy is what Calpers calls additional discretionary payments, ADP. And so under that strategy, if you had, let's say, money sitting around, like I believe right now you have a deferred liability reserve fund that has a little over 2 million balance in it. And it earns, as we heard from Mike earlier, very low rate of return. Well, you could use some or all of that balance to pay down a portion of your unfunded liability. And you could do so strategically by cherry picking. Your unfunded liability is comprised of 22 separate amortization bases. And so you could pick those bases that will result in the most savings for you. And we can work with you and help you figure out what those are. Another option is, and we did this recently a few months ago with another special district such as yours. In their circumstance, they had set aside monies for a project that they were going to build, and plans changed, and now they realized that they will not be building the project until 10 years from now. So as opposed to having the money sit for 10 years and right now earn nothing, they opted to take the money and pay down their UIL, and they will then repay themselves every year by making pension payments. So it's like an internal loan, essentially, and they will be making a higher return than the 0.5% they're earning now with the bank. Another way to do this is some agencies are only doing pay-go for their capital projects. And so they have now realized that, well, instead of using our cash for pay-go, given where rates are, why don't we borrow on a tax-exempt basis for these capital projects? Rates are so low, we can borrow at 2 or 3% today, and then use that cash to pay down the unfunded liability, because that's a better use for that cash, and we can lock in a low borrowing rate. And others use a combination. So there could be a hybrid approach of using cash on hand or reserves on hand to strategically buy down certain liabilities, and then maybe do borrowing. And then another strategy is borrow specifically for paying down the UIL, and that's done through the issuance of pension obligation bonds. Those are issued on a taxable basis. And again, given where rates are today, and Rick will talk about rates in a few slides, rates are so low that instead of paying 7% or 6.8% to Calpers today, you could pay 3% on these bonds. And then you take the proceeds of the bonds and you pay down the unfunded liability. And you, in doing so, through the bonds, you could keep the same payment profile. And remember, it was like a bell-shaped curve, right? Your payments are gradually increasing and then going down, or you could smooth the payments over and kind of have a level payment structure. And so there are many tools in the toolbox, and each of them has its pros and cons. And sometimes it's really a mishmash of strategies that compiled together in a hybrid approach deliver the best results for the agency. Today, we are only giving you the very high level of here are some options. And then if the district's interested in exploring them further, we would come back and prepare more detailed analysis with how the various options can pencil in. And let me pause here and see if you have any questions.
I have a quick question. Does this also take into account the retiree insurance, or is this strictly for the pension?
This is strictly for the pension. Speaking of retiree insurance, I don't know if that's the case with your district, but in this other district, an additional source of funds for a small discretionary payment. They were over budgeting for retiree insurance, and at the end of the year, they always had more that they had set aside than the cost was. And so these additional payments that you make, you can make it anytime, and you can make them in 1 year and then not make them for many years. And then when you have another opportunity, you chip down again from the UL. And so they used that additional funding to make a small contribution, or you can actually use it to make the prepayment to Calpers to get the 3% discount every year. And with that, I'll pass it on to Rick to talk about pension obligation bonds in greater detail.
Thank you, Anna. So for the next part of the presentation, we'll talk about pension obligation bonds. Like any other bond, the pension obligation bond is really a loan. You're borrowing money to pay off some or all of the UAL from Calpers. Pension obligation bonds are taxable. They're taxable. The IRS deems a pension obligation bond like working capital overhead, and that's why it is not tax exempt. Instead of a pension obligation bond or a POB, the district can issue a utility revenue bond, just like water or electric. A revenue pledge will be required. We don't recommend that. It's just an option. You have a very good credit rating, and your pension obligation bonds would receive a very good rating. As we mentioned before, as Anna mentioned, that Calpers is charging you 7%, soon to be 6.8%, and the interest rate on pension obligation bonds are much, much lower than that. They're down to about 3%. The idea of the pension obligation bond is to reshape your overall pension liability payment. So your payment schedule, if you looked at that graph, it looked like a hump. Instead of the hump and the rising payment every year until 2032, we would shave that off. Pension obligation bonds will shave that off, and therefore it provides better budget predictability and more sustainability, fiscal sustainability. With the record low interest rates in the market, the bond market has seen a lot of pension obligation bonds in the last year and a half. More and more Calpers members have turned to pension obligation bonds to pay off the UAL or pay it down. And the investor market for pension obligation bonds is very strong. Mike, you want to go to the next one? So to give you an example, since 2020, we've seen over 50 pension obligation bond issues in California, totaling about $7.5 billion. We've mentioned a few here from Northern California, such as Grass Valley, City of Red Bluff, Town of Corte Madera in Marin County, Livermore area rec and park. These are all very good areas. And yet they decided to issue pension obligation bonds, even though they all have great credit ratings. Corte Madera is AAA rated. Very high financials, very strong financials and high demographics, but they issued pension obligation bonds so they can provide better budget predictability. Mike, go ahead. So for you, what Dan will talk about in a minute is we analyzed a pension obligation bond for you by paying off your miscellaneous plan. We did not include the PEPR plan because the balance is pretty small. So Dan will talk about two options. we modeled. One is a 20-year option and one is a 15-year option. Both of them will reshape your repayment schedule. And the idea here is just to really communicate what could be the benefits to the district by issuing pension obligation bonds. But as Anna mentioned, if the district wanted to move forward with it, we would become more strategic. We would determine how to pay off your UAL, because your UAL is really a layer cake. You may not know it, but the UAL has about 20 different bases, 20 different amortization schedules. And we would look to pay off the ones that are the most expensive to you. And the financing team would explore that if you're interested in moving forward. Anyway, Dan, you go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So as Rick said, I performed a POB analysis here. Now, this graph you see on your screen, the blue bar graph is the Calpers repayment schedule currently. It's the same one that Anna showed you a few slides ago. But what I've done is I've put two line graphs on top of it to show how a POB would shave off some of the Calpers repayment. We have two lines here. I'll start with the gold line. That is a 15-year POB issuance. The table on the top right corner, you can see the right column has the stats on this 15-year issuance. We're assuming a par amount of just over 15 million. That includes a full payoff of this miscellaneous plan and cost of issuance. We're assuming a 15-year term. We're assuming today's interest rates. So those are always subject to change. But with a 15-year term, we are calculating that your average fiscal year debt service on the new POBs would be about 1.3 million. You can see how that is, substantially less than the blue repayment schedule, especially in 2032 and 2033, when that repayment schedule starts to almost scratch 1.8 million. The district would only be paying 1.3 million. So you'd see substantial savings there. This 15-year term provides about just under 20 million in total debt service. And we're assuming right now that would create savings of about $6.9 million over the life. So that's comparing the 24-year repayment schedule versus the debt service paid on this 15-year bond. One thing I really want to point out that Anna mentioned is this blue bar graph. It changes every year depending on how Calpers investments do. So even if these POB bonds were already issued, the savings could change because this blue bar graph changes. Next, I want to show the red line. Oh, sorry. Yeah, thanks. The red line shows a 20-year term. So a 20-year term, it will increase overall debt service, but we will get lower fiscal year debt service because of the longer term. The fiscal year debt service drops down to just $1.1 million. One downside here is because it goes out 20 years, you can see once we get beyond about 2036, you'd actually be paying a little bit, you'd be paying more on the bonds because that repayment schedule from Calpers drops off so much. That being said, there's still significant savings, savings of $4.8 million. It's less savings than a shorter term, but you do benefit by getting, smaller fiscal year payments. The last thing I guess I want to point out on this table is those bottom two columns. We show net present value savings. Net present value savings are the total savings discounted down to today's dollar. So for a 20-year term, $4.8 million in total savings, that would get discounted down to $3.9 million in savings, for example. And then we also show that as a percentage of the amount of Calpers you're actually paying off. So we see NPV savings percentage of 25% for the 20-year term and as high as 29% for the 15-year term. We use this NPV savings percentage as kind of a guide in our industry of whether refunding is worthwhile or a good deal for the issuer. And anything that we use actually 3% or 5% as a guide. So 25% and 29% NPV savings is pretty outstanding. I think we should hold here for any questions on the numbers.
Yeah.
I do want to make a couple of points, maybe just highlight a few things that Dan said to make sure everyone understands his points and the nuances here. So again, these bonds will be fixed rate bonds. So we'll lock in the rates for the bonds at issuance. However, because Calpers' investment return experience changes throughout the years, your UAL will be fluctuating. And so, as Dan mentioned, this means that your comparison, your bonds debt service will be fixed, but what you're comparing that debt service to is a moving target. And so these savings could move around. And if investment returns are lower than what's projected, you would still see your UAL increasing. However, one of the strategies that a lot of agencies who've issued PO bonds have applied is, to the extent you have these annual savings in the early years, because your bonds debt service is lower than the Calpers payments, for sure, over the very short near term, they're putting those savings into a pension liability management fund. And so if UAL grows and your payment increases, you now have that money set aside to help offset some of those fluctuations. And another point to make is, we typically don't recommend paying off 100% of the UAL for a number of reasons. One reason, let's take the optimistic approach, is if the returns recover over time, then you could be in an overfunded status again. And so then you borrowed more than what you needed to, number one. Number two, that creates a really tough position for the agency in labor negotiations, because if you are in an overfunded situation, it's really difficult to explain to the employees why you cannot increase their benefits. And if you were to do that, that would set you up for the future to make those higher payments when you really don't know if you'll be able to do so. So a lot of nuances here, and in crafting the strategy, it's really good to work with your team to think these nuances carefully to make sure you pick what's really beneficial for the district. And with that, please ask any questions you may have.
I don't have any questions, but it's just seeming like, and you know, the numbers are showing that it's generating a lot of interest for me to take a harder look at this in the future. So really appreciate all this so far. So carry on. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah. Michael, why don't we head to the next slide here?
Can I ask a quick question then?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. You answered one of my questions about a strategy that most agencies don't fund 100% of that UAL. Is there a range that you see more typically? Of course, it'll depend on many different factors, but is that typically more in the 80 to 90% range as a target?
Typically.
And so what would that do to these numbers here, just so that the board has sort of a fair comparison of and expectations of what it might actually see in the savings?
Yeah, I can give you an idea. If you refunded, let's say 80%, the par amount would drop because we are paying off less. And that would decrease average fiscal year debt service. So you would see the gold line and the red line drop a little bit, come a little bit lower. But then we'd have to also compare against a smaller Calpers repayment schedule because we're only paying off 80%. So there's still 20% of this repayment schedule we're leaving out. So essentially both the bar graphs would drop a little bit, and so would our debt service lines. Savings would probably drop a little bit, but not too much. It'd be close. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question.
I'd like to say is I'm glad we have a Michael Solomon on our staff to take care of all this material and all these technical things on these bond issues. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Director Aguirre.
Yes.
Yeah, so our next slide here, back, I believe it was 2015, the Government Finance Officers Association put out a statement recommending against agencies issuing pension obligation bonds. They laid out 6 points as to why agencies should not, why they should avoid these pension obligation bonds. And we thought we'd address them. Some of their reasons kind of missed the mark, but we definitely want to review them all with you. The first thing they bring up is reinvestment risk. That has to do with the fact that our savings are, like Anna said, our savings are our debt service is compared against the existing Calpers repayment schedule to get our savings. So they're subject to change with how Calpers investment performs in the future. So there's always a chance that Calpers could potentially earn less than what the agency borrows the POBs at. So we're estimating right now around 3.5%. The chances are pretty low, but it's something that does exist. So that concern does have some truth to it. But a lot of their other concerns miss a little bit. Their second concern is that POBs are complex instruments. They're really not. They're, like Anna said, they're fixed rate bonds. They would be issued. They have a similar structure to what the capital improvement bonds we talked about half an hour ago. Really no complex financial instruments involved. Point number 3 mentions that the GFOA worries that it increases an agency's bonded debt burden and reduces how much debt they can issue in the future. First of all, you guys as a utility district, you're not subject to any debt limit. And it is really not true. POBs replace payments you're making on your pension. So it's really the same debt burden. Next slide, we can go through those last 4 points that the GFOA made. They brought up inflexible prepayment terms. That's just not true. We issue our POBs with a standard 10-year call option. It's the same call option the capital improvement bonds would have. Really nothing tricky there. Reason 5, GFOA is against POBs. They talk about principal deferment or extending the term of a repayment. And we structure POBs, and most people structure POBs to match the term of the existing repayment schedule or shorten it. Both the models I showed you today are shortened. Instead of a 24-year term that Calpers currently has, I showed you a 20-year bond and a 15-year bond. So no principal is pushed out. And then lastly, the GFOA was worried that issuing POBs could negatively affect an issuer's credit rating. We've found this to be pretty untrue. Rating agencies have really seen POBs as a positive to an issuer's credit. It sees them as being proactive on attacking their pension costs. POBs have been getting really good ratings from Standard & Poor's, who do a lot of these ratings. They are giving POBs the same ratings as general obligation bonds. So we don't really see that last point. So overall, we want to address these GFOA concerns, but I think there's a reason that POBs have become so popular, as Rick talked about with all these agencies doing it over the last 2 years. Yeah, last thing I'll talk to you guys about is what happens after a POB issuance. My models assumed 100% payoff. And even if we did do that, paid off the current miscellaneous plan in full, there's always a chance that another UAL will be created. It hinges on how the Calpers investments do. If they fail to achieve their projected rate of return, there will be a shortfall, and that will create a new UAL. So at that time, the city would be paying on their new pension obligation bonds, and they would also be paying on this new UAL. The inverse could happen where Calpers has higher than expected returns and the UAL decreases, and now you've overpaid. If you did pay off 100%, you've overpaid. You would get a credit from Calpers. However, as Anna said, a strategy to mitigate this risk would be to pay off a percentage, like 80% or 90%, instead of paying off 100% of the entire UAL. So ultimately, there's really no possible way to eliminate potential for any future UAL. The only way to do that is if you left Calpers entirely. There's always going to be that risk of a new UAL being created. So what we're showing you is really just a way to minimize the costs on the liabilities currently owed. There's always risk of future UAL. Any questions on what happens after a POB issuance? Okay.
Here's a snapshot of the Treasury market over the last 30 years. It's based on the 30-year Treasury. You could see on the far left in 1991, the 30-year US Treasury bond was over 8%. Today, the 30-year Treasury bond is under 2%. So that's the reason why we're seeing so many pension obligation bonds in the market. For the past year and a half, Treasury bonds have been at all-time lows in yield, and pension obligation bonds are priced off Treasury bonds. So that's why so many have been coming to market. Any questions about the market?
When's it going up?
I'll look at my crystal ball, Mike.
Yeah, there you go.
We don't know. Okay, and then our last slide is a general timeline for a pension obligation bond. It usually takes 3 to 4 months for a special district. Today we begin the discussion with you. The next step would be, if you want to go forward, to engage a financing team. Then in month 2, the member of the financing team, the bond attorneys, bond counsel, will draft legal documents. And at that point, we would start analyzing detailed pension obligation bond options for you. Determine how much you want to pay off and what schedules to pay off that are part of that layer cake to maximize your savings. In month 3, the prospectus or the official statement would be drafted, and we would apply for a rating. And by the end of month 3 and beginning of month 4, we would then be in the position to go to market, price the bonds, and close the transaction. Any questions? Go ahead.
Offering this information to us, and are you, and I mean this in the nicest of ways, but are you the only company out there that provides these bonds, or is this something, I guess this is a question for Brian or for Mike, is this something that we need to go out to for an RFP in order to find a company to do this, with all the other things, or is it you've already done the vetting and this is the company that we would use? I think you guys are doing a fantastic job, though, understanding what is going on and the concerns of such a large unfunded liability.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Director Harris. As Rick had mentioned earlier, Brandis Talman has participated in various the previous debt fundings for the district, and as well as our utilization of straddling. I'd have to look specifically at district code, whether it's a requirement to go out to RFP for the underwriter, RFP for the district council, RFP for the municipal advisor. I don't believe that's the case, but I'd have to check on that. Brandis Talman and Anna have worked with the district for many years. Anna is also our specialist when it comes to municipal advisory services with respect to CFDs, which we have two very big ones and one very popular one called Grace Crossing.
Yes. No, I don't want you to think that I'm anti you guys, because I'm not at all, but I just want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence as a board in making sure that we're kind of going out and getting the best bang for our buck type of thing. But you guys are super knowledgeable, and I appreciate all of the patience that you have working through all of this information for us, because it is very confusing and there's a lot to it.
Good question.
I could just point out a clarity on this page here. The blue bars are, the far left blue bar is Calpers required payment in July of 20 or over 22-23, or the required payment with a 3% discount in July of 2022. So the blue bars represent Calpers projected required annual payments in addition to the match on payroll that the company does. And this is a long-term play. This is not a next year we save a bunch of money and it's all done. It's quantified in the upper right here on this page, but it's a long-term play to refinance debt at 3.5% roughly, instead of being close to 7% with Calpers. All right, enough on pension obligation bonds.
Yeah.
You sure? Going once.
It's really is a lot of information. To me, it makes sense. It's like refinancing my house. Why wouldn't I do it? I guess would be my biggest question. Sort of a big overview like this. Why wouldn't we do something like this?
There's very compelling reasons to do it. That's why there's this hot market for the BOBs right now. There's a lot of smart boards and a lot of smart finance directors at a lot of governmental entities in California and elsewhere throughout the country, in particular for Calpers in California, that have missed the mark. But it's those low interest rates that Rick showed at the very end. Historic low interest rates are what's driving that, combined with the Calpers issues.
Okay.
President Finn, I wanted to add one thing real quick. I couldn't find my mute button here, but just a clarification. So for professional, financial, accounting, legal services do not require, a formal bidding process or RFP procurement. It's that the district identifies services that are most beneficial for the district and goes from there.
Thank you. I also have one other question, is if, we did finance it, is it only specific to this unfunded liability with Calpers, or would we be able to use some of these funds towards the retiree insurance? I think it's the other pension benefit, other benefits.
Are you referring to OPEB, other post benefits? Yeah. So there are, we'll need to take a look at that. There are strategies that involve OPEB too. I am not aware of any recent long-term OPEB borrowings. I know entities usually address those benefits differently. They create these Section 115 OPEB trust funds, and they cover those that way. Rick, I don't know if you've heard anyone issue OPEB bonds.
I have not.
Yeah, we have that trust, and it's a little over 100,000 a year we pay into that trust. So we've that's a much smaller liability, and but I could certainly bring that back to the board at another date with a small time slot to brief everyone on kind of the status of the OPEB. Other post-employment benefits.
Exactly.
Thank you.
All right, I'll turn this back over to Director or President Finn. I don't know, it's 7 o'clock. Do you want to take a quick break or just dive right into the last item?
I think we would all appreciate a little break. Yes, Shauna, I see your hand up.
Just want to make sure we call for public comment before we end the item.
And is that workshop items? Sometimes we don't do that, but I'll be happy to, because it's better safe than sorry. Do we have any public comments on this item?
No, President.
Thank you. And are we, you know, as a board, we're not being asked to take action today. We're being given information and educating ourselves on this. Is this going to come back to us in what sort of time frame?
Well, we are, as the next workshop item indicates, we are entering budget cycle. So it is very likely to come back to the board over the next few months once we dive into it a little closer and see the whole financial model of what things are looking like. So.
Okay, so we're filing this information away as we tackle some of our financial puzzles in the next 6 weeks or so.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you, Anna and Dan and Rick. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
And Mike, I think that was a good idea of yours that I would like to take about a 10-minute break before we come back with the last workshop item.
Okay.
Okay, so let's adjourn. It is 7 o'clock on the nose. Let's all be back at 7:10, please. Thank you. 2, 3. Give Director Aguera a moment or two to come back online with us. Hear him.
There he is.
Welcome back, Joe. Welcome back, everybody. Okay. Okay, I think all the vital operators are here. Mike, item number 13. Our discussion of goals, objectives, and key assumptions. So let's bring it home.
All right. Thank you, President Finn. All right. Screen up. So this is the first workshop of the 2022-2023 budget cycle. So today's agenda is to go over the timeline and provide a little bit of background information, and then talk about goals and objectives, as well as key assumptions, kind of what we're seeing on the front end of the budget cycle, and dive into that. Just a reminder, this is a workshop. There's no actual decisions, specific actions being taken tonight, but guidance from the board is appreciated, and just seeking understanding of where we're at and what things are looking like and things to think about. So a balanced budget, you guys, I'm sure have heard that the district has had a balanced budget for many years, I'm sure forever. It's a balancing act for sure between income and expenses and capital expenditures included. It is, as President Finn mentioned earlier, there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. The debt issuance and pension obligation bond potential are just two pieces of a very large puzzle. Some of those things to bring to the forefront of mind are in the pie chart. Think of those as pieces of the puzzle that will be coming together over the next 30 to 45 days to achieve a full budget, as well as a very important piece of the budget process is the financial master plan that provides a 10-year perspective outlook, particularly when we're talking about debt issuances and capital improvement plans. We need to look beyond just the next 2 years. This is the first workshop tonight, and there are 2 additional workshops scheduled October 6th and October 20th, and then another budget presentation and budget discussion seeking final approval on November 3rd as currently scheduled. I've covered this slide earlier. This is just a perspective on our current budget. Covered these before. So first and foremost, as far as budget for 2022 and 23 and goals and objectives go, alignment with our mission and the values of the district are critical. And so we need to make sure we're making our decisions and planning appropriately with our mission and our values in mind at all times. When it comes to, we also want to make sure that we have alignment with our strategic plan that was approved back in April or May. And there was 5 specific goals outlined in that strategic plan. I will not read them for sake of the audience that knows these answers, and those viewing that do not know it can refer to specifically to the strategic plan for additional details. But we need to make sure that the items identified in that strategic plan are properly captured as best as possible in the 2022 and 2023 budgets. We also have strategic initiatives in the strategic plan, and those need to be incorporated into our budget plan as well. Specific to the goals, what we're working on is ensuring that all the specific capital projects, and there's quite a few of them outlined in pages 22 to 28 of the strategic plan, that under each of these goals have a lot of capital projects and other special projects identified in alignment with these goals that we would like to achieve in 2022 and 2023. So, ensuring that we address those items, and if they're not addressed, pointing that out to the board and everyone to go, that was in there, but we've decided that it doesn't need to be in there, at least not in 2022 and 2023, and why, and that type of thing. So ensuring that our budget draft incorporates the strategic plan goals and the things outlined in them is important, and we will do that. Specific to initiatives, this one's a little bit tricky. We need to keep momentum moving, as everyone knows, on these strategic plan initiatives, and at some point we need to decide how we're going to best quantify that in the budget for 2022 and 2023. And the draft that I've got working right now with the team, I just basically have a placeholder for professional services beyond, for incremental costs beyond staff bandwidth, internal resources bandwidth, to have some type of funding available to address strategic plan related needs from a financial standpoint, resources beyond the current internal resources. So it's just a placeholder. It's not something for the board to noodle on and think about, and we'll be doing the same, of course. But it's going to take some resources, likely take some resources beyond what we have in-house to keep real momentum on these initiatives. And if we're going to do that, we should budget some dollars for it. I'll pause there before I dive into kind of more traditional budgeting key assumptions. Any questions from the board? Brian, you want to add anything to that?
I think, well, thanks, Mike. As you pointed out in the previous slide, as we proceed through the next two workshops, staff will be presenting some more details on the strategic initiatives. We are prepared to, here in the very near future, to announce the committee members and begin that scheduling of those first committee meetings. We'll be looking for board participation in those as well. And then we'll be able to, after those initial discussions, really start to put some accurate placeholders for the budget for 2022. As these initiatives begin to develop, that's when we'll start really exploring alternative funding and what budget adjustments are necessary. And one of the things that Mike's going to get into here in the next couple of slides is, as we go through the assumptions, is the changing landscape of public utilities and our economy as a whole. So as we go through this first initial pass through on the budget planning process, remember, this is a high level kind of setting the tone, but as we go into the next workshops, it's really important that we really start to drill down on each of these with much more detail and granularity. So go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Brian. So one of the key assumptions is inflation, and it is currently very hot. If you don't know that, you haven't been paying attention to the news, or at least the market news. But the current inflation rate is quite high, higher than it's been in the past. It is considered by the feds and economic experts, because there's a lot of them, as transitory and is expected to tamper down over the next 12 to 18 months. Here in Tahoe and Truckee, we'll see. But the current cost estimates, as you guys have certainly noticed at various board presentations about the cost of doing business, things are escalating. But for 2022, we're looking at what current costs are plus 3% as a kind of a starting point. Depending on the item, you may adjust up or down. And then for 2023, the models will assume a 3% inflation. And for the financial master plan, I'm going to assume 3%, currently plan to assume 3% for the remaining 8 years of the 10-year plan. The 3% is in alignment with the past 2 budget cycles. I did not kick off this budget without doing my homework on the past, not just the past budget cycle, but also the previous budget cycle before that, to glean information as far as the types of things that are bubbling up. Any key financial matters presentation needs to include a component of purchase power. It's a big number in the electric utilities budget. It's 53% of their operating expenses. Demand is growing. We have EV coming down like a freight train coming throughout the country. That growth can be estimated, at least for 2022 and 2023. The cost side can be volatile. The last few months have been quite a bit higher than last year at the same time. And so for workshop 2, we'll be basically we'll have a 1 or 2 page kind of detail schedule of megawatt hours anticipated, planned for budget, and what percentile of expectation we have for what that cost looks like. You don't want to miss this item in budget, but at the same time, if you're overly conservative, you've got kind of a bloated budget, so to speak. So we want to be as best we can, and everyone needs to be grounded and understand where we're at with our purchase power budget, because it's a big number. Cap and trade I threw into this presentation. It is not in the staff report. I call myself out on that. I apologize, but it is a large financial number in the budget that needs to be addressed. So I felt it important to add for tonight's presentation. The reserve fund balance was $1.6 million at the end of 2020. We used 1.4 of that in budget 2021, and we've only got an estimated close to 700,000 coming in, not 1.4 coming in like it did in 2020. So as predicted, the AB 3032 cap and trade sales are diminishing, and in the previous budget cycle, it was noted that it would end in 2021. We are seeing revenues in end in 21. We are seeing revenues coming in 2021. They are at a lower scale than the previous years. I don't know if Joe, if you're still on the line, or Stephen, if you want to add anything to that. What I can say is that the net effect of that is that the 1.4 million that we've been using to balance budget the last few years is going to be reduced going into 2022 and 2023 by about half.
Yeah, I would think. Thanks, Mike. I think you've hit it on the head. Going forward, the first 10 years was quite robustly funded. The amount of allocations to public agencies, including the district, and as Mike pointed out, the last several years we've had $1 million+ income from that cap and trade, but it's also been defined for the next 10 years out to 2030. And our allocation portion has essentially been cut in half. And as Mike pointed out, our revenues are about cut in half going out for almost to 2030 timeframe. So significantly reduced income coming in.
All right, thank you, Joe. Personnel is a large percentage of the budget for the district. It takes employees to operate the district, and current full-time equivalents for budget 2021 are 73. There are 2 additional positions that have been approved that puts us at 75. And then in preliminary discussions, I would say there's probably, like any company, if you ask what you want to do for next year's budget, there's multiple position adds. These are the 4 that have made the first pass, so to speak. There was certainly more than this in discussions, like any company. But these are the 4 that have kind of bubbled down or bubbled up to hold traction through current draft. And certainly we will continue to evaluate the organizational structure and the overall financial balance for the organization. As we get into workshop 2, we'll have a more refined perspective on what this looks like.
Mike, if I could add and jump in right here. So for the additional 4 preliminary initial discussions here, we have bulleted out. These are all, for the most part, centered around additional regulatory burden that public agencies, public utilities are experiencing in California in particular. But we're having to shift some of our operations and maintenance responsibilities to compliance measures. Things like on the water side with meter testing, on the electric side, vegetation management, and some of the reporting burden that's out there is shifting some of our responsibilities across all staff levels. So we'll present this in more detail as we get into the budget presentations over the next couple of months. But it's important to note here that when I mentioned the changing landscape in public utility management, part of that is the unfunded mandates that we continue to see coming out of the regulatory environment.
Thank you, Brian. Staying on the personnel theme, rate of pay, labor costs increase is currently, this current draft we have going is at 4.5% for 2022. The reason for that is the last 2 cycles of the CPI index that is stipulated in the MOU has been over 4%, and I don't see any near-term relief on that for the next. There are 2 more reports out. So that was June. There's a August, and then October's number is what's defined in the MOU, but it's currently at 4.3. So the placeholder right now for contingency kind of conservative planning purposes is at 4.5, and I've used 3.0 for 2023 unless directed otherwise. Keep with those figures. Insurance costs, health insurance is a large financial obligation of the district to have quality employees. You need to offer health insurance, and that's a $2.7 million nut in budget 2021. We just last week got the renewal notice of a modest increase of 3.0. It's a little different, depending on the exact plan, but roughly the average is about 3.0 increase in medical side, and then 0% increase on the dental. So that I consider that good news in the healthcare industry and market renewals that we're seeing. So the workers' comp cost, more good news. We had a favorable renewal on that, and our effective rate on the percent of wages went from 3.2 to 2.2. And so we'll be budgeting less than that 300,000 in 2022. So that's good news, something closer to 225. So excited to see that come through. And that is in large part It's due to market conditions of workers' comp in California, as well as our experience mod rate continues to improve as things have fallen off, and we have not had a lot of incidents. So very good news there. A few other cost items that are big and are important to mention. Wildfire mitigation costs, as the board is aware, roughly in 2020 and 2021, there was $1 million in the budget for that, and both years we're spending it closer to 1.5. Currently in the budget drafts, we're anticipating at least $1.5 million in budget for 2022 and 2023. So we'll be evaluating that in relation to our overall wildfire mitigation plan. Cybersecurity continues to be a concern, and I've recommended we put a placeholder in for consulting services in the IT budget to help us with those specific items beyond what is currently in budget for recurring matters. And then workforce housing was not in the budget, and we need to, I'm sure everyone wants to continue our relationship there to help address the housing issues with hiring and keeping employees. So we need to budget that line item. Next, moving on to capital expenditures. It's a large part of the district's annual budget. As you're aware, electric and water have 10-year capital improvement plans, ensuring that those are integrated appropriately into the budget for 2022 and 2023, as well as the financial master plan for all 10 years, as I mentioned earlier. We have about 80 vehicles rolling stock. We've updated and refreshed the 10-year replacement schedule there. I did some tweaking work with the team there to minimize the blips in a few years and to make sure that that was balanced. There are some vehicle ads recommended that we're going to be vetting over the next 30 days to understand the full scope and ramification of those requests. And then IT is another big area of spend that we plan to have at consistent levels with previous periods. Specifically looking at 2022 and 2023 for electric, the capital plan that we currently have drafted does have an electric operations building that would be a prime candidate for potential new debt. So wanted to make sure and point that out. There's $3 million for district office building modernization, which you guys are aware of that project in development, as well as $1.5 million in drainage systems and 1.3 for SCADA, and then a bunch of other projects that add up to 1.6. The Martis Valley substation rebuild is scheduled for 2023. So next workshop, we'll be diving into, we'll be having, detailed plan by project for all years for us to be able to review at board's pleasure. On the water side, as you all are aware, there was a 10-year capital improvement plan with a little bit over $7 million a year in average per year in capital expenditures. There is a new water tank and pipeline related as a new debt candidate. That first item, a water main replacement could or could not be part of new debt issuance. The existing certificates of participation bonds, I believe it was 2006 when they were issued, but those were related to pipeline replacement projects, a big portion of it, from what I read. I was still a baby when that happened. Let's see. Moving from capital projects to debt service, This is the little background. This is the current debt service for electric and water utility. The last payment on the current pension obligation bonds. Just I forgot to mention that during the presentation of pension obligation bonds. But we do have that side fund debt is essentially was pension obligation bonds of the district. So it's not without precedent to have pension obligation bonds. Let's see. The dark fiber loan ends in 2022 as well. So electric will be debt free, barring new debt starting in 2023. And then for water, it's important to know that in 2021, the debt drops by $1 million as a portion of the refunding bonds and the DWR Prop 55 loan comes off. So at the bottom of this slide, this is just to give you a perspective of what $10 million in debt looks like at the top. 10 million in debt would be 500,000 in debt service, and what that impact looks like on a per customer basis. These are just for handy metrics of understanding of what some debt levels mean. At the bottom, I reverse engineered what is with the water dropping $1 million in debt service. And so if you were going to replace, if you're going to replace that debt service dollar for dollar, I can get the laser pointer. So water has $1 million coming off. If you replace that with 20-year debt, you could issue 15.6 million in principal of debt. If you replace it with 30-year debt at a little bit higher interest rate, because the rate's higher if you go longer, you could do basically 20 million in debt service for the same $1 million that falls off. So this is just for all of us to have some reference points for debt service as we move forward. I am not going to talk anymore about pension obligation bonds tonight. Know that we are looking at that. It's important to know that our district code does have debt issuance and management policy section in Title 3, Section 7, and we do have debt goals. So anything we do would need to be in alignment with that. We would need to ensure that we're following those guidelines as outlined, which I don't foresee as a problem, but we will definitely be on top of that. You guys know that investment income is problematic, and that will put pressure on balancing the budget for 2022 and 2023. This slide is probably hard to read. I apologize. This is just giving a rate perspective on, because the net effect of our cost of service will be a revenue requirement that translates into rates. The things I want to put out on this page is that the district on electric and water is kind of middle of the pack, if not on the low side. And all of these entities have or will be raising rates as well over time, if not in progress now, which Liberty in particular is of note right now. They just filed a late rate case for our area, Liberty Utility, California, requesting a 40% increase for 2022 in the average bill for residential and commercial. Electric went for a lot of years without a rate increase. Not sure why. So that did not keep up with inflation, but perhaps they were a little high at the time. I'm not sure. I don't know the history, but we do have a rate study in progress now. Joe and I and others have been working with the rate consultant. I believe we're also, as part of that, also working on a green rate. Joe, you want to add any flavor to electric rates?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Yeah, as Mike mentioned, we have a consultant who is helping us, GDS Associates. They have completed the green rate study, and right now they're working on the electric rates for future years. That study is underway, and we'll have more information for the board at an upcoming meeting.
Thank you, Joe. Water rates, we just went through a water rate study, and had some pretty significant rate increases approved in that. And at this time, we are cautiously optimistic that we will not have to amend that in a negative direction. And we'll be targeting to balance the budget with those expectations as presented here. Hopefully, as you read in the staff report, I do have a recommendation for a reserve, district code reserve modification in specific wording of 3.0.04 with a specific sentence. I'm open to ideas, or if someone has other concerns, I'd love to hear them. But right now, the way this is worded, it does not exclude purchase power, and we already have an electric rate reserve at 50% of the purchase power cost, and that we have that reserve balance in hand. And so with that, I don't want to be caught with my pants down, shooting the moon, so to speak, with interpreting that it's okay to exclude purchase power when it's not specifically called out. So I'm like, for the board to consider, I will definitely try my best to research a few other districts that have something similar, that have a rate reserve and a general operating reserve, and see if they exclude it. But it seems redundant to not exclude purchase power in this policy. Or am I reading it wrong? I'm open to conversation. Does everybody follow that? I need some feedback.
I'm not sure that I do. So let's do that one more time. Because it was going.
So the electric and water have a general fund operating reserve policy, and the electric general fund should have a cash reserve equal to 1/2 of the annual budget operating expenses, excluding depreciation. And the reason why it excludes depreciation is a non-cash item. That's a pretty common thing. What happens though is, because it doesn't say excluding purchase power, I have to interpret this as 50% of operating expenses, including purchase power. Yet at the same time, you already have an electric rate reserve of 50% of your purchase power budget. So to me, it's redundant. And so I'm requesting that we revise the policy and shift any additional funds that are there that are in the operating reserve over to capital reserve, which is essentially where they're being used to begin with. They're both rate generated. There's no difference in where the dollars came from. It's just a board designation kind of shifting to capital reserve. So
Seems reasonable to me.
So this, thank you, Director Harris. I like to be called reasonable.
I'm a former auditor, remember?
Yeah. I will certainly try my best to find a few other utilities to benchmark against on this matter before we go final with it. This would be something that would come, through the final budget approval process. But I just wanted to get ahead of the curve on this one for people to digest.
Okay, thanks.
And we don't have this concern. This wording is fine on the water side because they don't have, while they do have 1.3 million in purchase power, it's not the same. It's apples and oranges, kind of. No. Let's see. I believe this is my last item. We are looking at with our conservation analyst, program manager, Stephen Keats, we are looking at monetizing our LCFS credits. This would basically create another restricted fund, yet another restricted fund to manage here at the district, which we welcome, but could potentially provide us some real cash dollars to address transportation, electrification specific programs. So really good news. I'm excited to see this get vetted out and kind of laid out and implemented. There is no direct financial impact with this workshop, but know that we are headed toward direct financial impact with a budget approval in a few months. And to the extent any new debt is planned, that could have an impact in the out years as well. So tonight, looking for additional feedback. I went pretty quick since we went long, at least I felt like I went quick, and covered the kind of the keynotes of planning things that are big picture for the budget here at the district. Questions?
Okay, thank you, Mike. First, I'm going to ask if we have any public comment on this workshop this evening.
No, President Finn, thank you.
Thank you, Shauna. And now I will open it up to the board for questions and discussions. Does anybody have any questions to start? I don't see any hands going up.
How many current employees do we have right now? Again, I think you gave me that number a while ago, but I forgot.
Well, approved is 75. I can think of two vacancies that we're recruiting for. There's one in, there's two additional, so we're probably right at 69, 68 or 69.
And then it's easy to think, water and electric, those positions, it's pretty clear that they'll go into those divisions. That other extra position, is that going to be under your direction, or is that going to be in the general manager's area?
I can add some commentary on this. That the positions that we're discussing at the moment or presenting as a workshop is high-level preliminary discussions on what we need to budget for. The staff will present an proposed org chart amendment or adjustments, part of the budget process, and there'll be some additional detail there. We're still weighing out where positions will most effectively reside in the organizational chart. And once we have those decisions finalized, we'll present it to the board during the budget process.
Great, thanks.
We have any other director questions? And then I will say, how about director comments? Yes.
I had one other question is when the goals are listed, and I've mentioned this a few times during our strategic planning, there was a goal, and I want to say it was number 4, that looks at the private industry and takes the best practices. I know that discussion is not to change this, but just want to make sure that we're keeping in mind that we are a community public agency and not just private. So making, I know it's nice to have the goals and everything kind of reflect who you are. And I just wanted to pipe in that we are a community agency and a governmental agency, which kind of puts us a little bit into a different area. So for whatever that's worth.
Thank you, Director Harris. See
All
you.
right. Hey, thanks, Mike. Good presentation. Good kickoff to the budget. Some things to think about. I like your idea of modifying the district code. No sense in having repetition in there if we don't need it. And then the pension financing conundrum, some good thoughts there, and saving some money. So want to continue that. So thanks for this kickoff, and yeah, next one in October. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director
Mike,
Bennett.
we have 2 more workshops on this too, don't we? This is our first one.
Yes, sir.
Didn't you say we have 2 more?
We have 2 more workshops, October 6th and October 20th. They both are currently scheduled to start at 5.
Okay.
And then we'll be seeking budget approval on November 3rd as currently scheduled.
I'm going to add one quick commentary. I don't know that in the public arena, the October 6th has been scheduled for 5, so we may need to make some adjustments there and ask for additional board feedback. The October 6th meeting, I believe, was a regularly scheduled meeting, so we may have that starting at 6, but we'll get confirmation with the board on that one.
Excellent, thank you. I know part of that is, yeah, because of me. I just wanted a couple of comments on the whole thing. One is, I'm glad that there are the space holders for our initiatives. They're not worth doing if we don't, put our money where our mouth is and walk our talk, essentially. So, and that's a good place to start. And I'm assuming that's a lump sum to be divvied up amongst the initiatives as they come to
Right.
formation, I guess, is what I would say for this. Is that for the next 2 years, or is that 160,000 a year?
It was per year for 2 years.
Okay, per year for 2 years. Thank
It's-
you.
it's as drafted, and then anything over 15,000 is going to the board. So I mean, it's unlikely. It's not like it's $160,000 slush fund for me to go to seminars for most of the year. It's gonna, it's specific for moving those initiatives along, and that would be a team effort with the board involved in making those decisions.
Very good. And just as a general commentary on the information that you have provided us with tonight, that I am not averse to taking on debt. At this point in time, it seems like we have paid things down, we've paid things off, and interest rates are just almost too hard to resist. So, going forward, that's my general feedback on the position that we're at, in regards to both our capital projects and for our Calpers responsibilities. And I think, that was kind of all of my, sort of big free feedback, because that's what this is. It's again, us to be thinking about and making sure that we are moving towards our goals. So thank you for all this information to start us off with, and to think about how we're going to organize it in the next 2 meetings.
You bet.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to thank you also. I mean, it is a lot of information, a lot of moving parts, and a lot of goals and different ideas. And I appreciate that you've been able to contain them all in trying to, present it in a understandable way. So it's nice to have you. So thank you.
Thank you. It's a lot of information, that's for sure.
It is. But I think to echo Director Harris a bit, the efficiencies that you're sort of drawing to our attention, things that we can do to shave things here and there or reshape them, is going to be really useful to us, I think, going forward. The landscape is becoming more complex, to say the least, and I think we're going to all of our savings are going to be necessary because all of our spending is going to be necessary. And we're going to have to hit that, hit that balance. It's a challenge. So thank you. Would anybody else like to add anything else?
I would like to move to adjourn.
Okay. Cut to space. Thank you, Director Aguilera.
With the agenda.
I am happy to do that. Thank you very much, everybody, tonight for your contributions. And if nobody has anything else to add, I think we will adjourn this meeting. And well, I won't be seeing you at the next couple meetings. So enjoy your time without me.
All right, have a good one.
Have a nice evening. We'll see you
Good night.
in the future.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm leaving.